Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Morbid Planet's A Virgin's View. I'm your host, Erin Chapman. For our viewers that don't know, A Virgin's View is a segment where I review a classic horror film without being exposed to any background information or reviews on the film. For this task, I always have a guest co-host. So please welcome Jerry Knaak. Jerry is a horror buff, is an author, and hosts his own podcast called Get the Knack. You can find links to Jerry's work below, so make sure to check them out. So before we get started though, as usual, please beware, in case you haven't seen the film, there will be spoilers ahead. Tonight's film that we're going to explore is the cult horror classic Rosemary's Baby, which was 1968 when it came out. It starts out with, you've got a couple, Rosemary, who is a homemaker, and Guy, and their last name's Woodhouse. And he's a struggling actor, and it looks like they're going to check out a new apartment in New York City, and it's about the late 1960s. And I guess there was an old lady that lived there recently, and she died. They're also, the friend of theirs immediately warns them that the building had a reputation of incidents. There was a dead baby found in a newspaper, and a tenant was actually killed over accusations of witchcraft. Dun, dun, dun. So they take this place. The night they move in, I thought this was so corny, but anyway, they move in, they eat their takeaway on the floor, and it's bare, dirty, nasty looking floor. And all of a sudden she looks at her husband and is like, let's make love. And they go at it on the dirty floor.
You gotta break the apartment in.
But not on the dirty floor. They remodel the entire place. Everything is beautiful. And this is what Rosemary's working on is, renovating the whole place. Well, Guy goes to work as the struggling actor. And we at this point meet another tenant that she actually runs into in the laundry room. Next day they come home, and apparently her newfound friend has chucked herself out the 7-story window and is cherry pie all over the pavement. The gore was pretty good though, I thought. You could see part of her head, and they've got some good effects going on. The neighbors who actually were living with this tenant, she was recovering drug addict, I guess, that they were helping out. They show up and introduce Minnie and Roman Castevet, weird ass looking couple. He was wearing
fine old elderly folk of New York. Come on, Erin.
Well, he was wearing like this weird pink pinstripe suit, which made me think of a candy striper. I don't know if that's what they were going for. And she had like this fake bird hat on her head, lots of makeup going on. I know it was the 60s, but still. They instantly at this point insert themselves into Rosemary and Guy's lives rather deeply. Guy hits it off with the two geriatrics quite well. Rosemary's very suspicious, wants to keep hanging out with her regular friends if she can, but Guy is kind of forcing his newfound friends on her. Guy gets a huge break when the main character of one of his current gigs suddenly goes blind. He starts to work a lot more, neglects poor Rosemary at home. She feels very left out. To make her feel better, they decide to have a baby.
I think the baby thing was the plan all along. I think that, it was get married, get the apartment, have the baby. I don't think all of a sudden it was,
It was weird in the scene though, when all of a sudden it's like, kind of like, I don't like you and you're ignoring me. And that's like, okay, let's make a baby. And she's like, really? So,
well, there have been times in our society where people have done that to try to save relationships. Oh, let's have another child, right? It never works. But in this particular case, I think, young married couple, they were going to have a baby. That was the plan all along, right?
They basically end up having a nice evening in, and they're having dinner together, romantic. And out of the blue, Minnie from next door comes and knocks at the door with some homemade chocolate pudding type dish. Rosemary didn't like it. She sneaks half of it into like her napkin when her husband wasn't looking. He eats his, and she gets so wasted. Like so wasted and stoned that she couldn't even make it to bed, and he had to help get her there. The next morning though, she wakes up and her husband is like, oh, even though you were passed out, we still did it last night, which is so creepy. And he said that he was really loaded and, he doesn't have a thing for dead people, but he didn't want to pass up the time to make a baby. and she's got scratches all down her side. So obviously they got into it really heavily. And shortly after this happens, she ends up being pregnant. And they go to a doctor that the newfound friend neighbors refer her to, which is apparently the best in the city. And I was really surprised to see that it was an aged Ralph Bellamy. And I know you and I have talked about one of my favorite movies, His Girl Friday, before. So I don't know if you know who Ralph Bellamy played in that movie.
I don't recall the character, but
he played the fiance Bruce Baldwin, who Rosalind Russell was going to marry. But obviously he was way younger, and I was at first, I was like, is that him? And I was like, oh my god, it is. So I googled
Dr. Saperstein.
Yes, Dr. Saperstein.
But see, you got to go back with Ralph Bellamy because he's a universal horror icon. You got to go all the way back to 1941 to The Wolfman with him. So he was in that. So Bellamy's no stranger to horror films.
Rosemary goes to see him, as you know you do when you're pregnant, and he doesn't believe in giving vitamins. So I guess he gave Minnie, the neighbor, very specific instructions to make her this special shake each day, which is weird because we don't know what's in the shake. No one asks, no one questions it. But throughout the pregnancy as it's going on, Rosemary's losing a ton of weight, looks deathly ill, like her face is all gaunt and very, very pale and very thin. And she's also struggling with this constant pain that she says that never goes away.
And Saperstein tells her she's fine. Don't worry about it.
You're good. This is normal. This is what happens. So, which obviously, as we all know, is a red flag. But anyway. And so Rosemary's friend at this point comes to visit, Edward Hutchins, and he just comes by to check on her. And right away, again, he's like, oh my God, you look like death. What's wrong with you? And then he's also asking her about this weird charm she's wearing around her neck, which the Castevets gave her. And he then, guy comes home, they say hi, he leaves, and then he phones back Rosemary a little while later and says, it's really important, I need to see you tomorrow, we'll go for lunch. And she's like, okay. And the funny thing was, she went to go meet him for lunch the next day, and somehow between that and the 12-hour period, he basically got into a coma and never woke again. He dies a few months later, but, you know, just never woke up. Weird coincidence? Maybe. And this leads us up to New Year's. And basically, after New Year's, I guess Rosemary's kind of had it with all the stuff that's going on. She's not feeling good. She's pregnant. And she tries to sever the ties with the Castevets, the crazy neighbors. And she's getting really suspicious of everyone. And she buys some books on witchcraft, which she then shows her husband. Basically, he just says that, you know, they're bad and, you know, you don't read this stuff. And so she was like, okay, well, I'm even going to toss the necklace. So she even got rid of the necklace as well, because she's like, okay, when she went to Dr. Saperstein, a nurse commented that the necklace smelled like Dr. Saperstein was. So she's like, oh my God, he's in on it too, on the huge conspiracy, the witch conspiracy. So Guy does throw her books away, which I thought was a pretty dick move to do. But anyway.
Can't have the women folk reading. Can't do it.
No. Well, it was funny because he like stuck it up on the very top shelf where she couldn't reach. And that'd be like me because I can't get my stuff because I'm short. And then eventually he just tossed it because he's like, oh, that's bad shit. I don't want you reading that stuff. And I guess he freaks out on her as well because she was talking to some of her old school friends who are sane people. And he started saying that they're crazy bitches. And that she can't change a doctor because she wants to go get a second opinion at this point. And the reason she couldn't change the doctor was because he was worried it wasn't fair to Dr. Saperstein, which means he doesn't care about his wife at all. At this point, he's just like, no, you'll make the doctor feel bad, honey. So he wouldn't let her change doctors. So this all leads up to a huge breakdown where she tries to see a regular doctor and like sneaks out of the house, goes there.
Played by Charles Grodin.
Yes. And I guess she's like, don't tell my husband or anything, you know, I have all these suspicions. There's this conspiracy, there's plots, and everyone's against me, and it's all witchcraft.
I was afraid you wouldn't
And
believe
he's like, oh, go lie down. It's okay. We'll get you to the hospital, deliver your baby because it's due in a few days. And he rats on her. And then the husband shows up. The husband shows up. Dr. Saperstein shows up. And they physically drag her back to her apartment, where in the process of her like freaking out and fighting and everything, she goes into labor and then passes out and has her baby. She wakes up, we're almost at the end of the film, and they're like, sorry, your baby died. You know, we can try again, it's okay. And of course she's still skeptical, and she's like, no, it didn't. And then she's kind of recovering. Guy keeps telling her it's okay, we'll have another one, it's okay. And then she hears this baby crying next door. And of course, right away, she's like, you know, her spider sense is like, oh my God, it's my baby. And so she sneaks out to go next door to the Castevets, armed with a knife from the kitchen. And she gets into this room, and it's another one of my favorite scenes. It's just creepy. It's like you've got all the witches, of course, that she's been suspecting in this room, and they're having a huge party. It looks like a baby shower or something's going on. They've got gifts on the table. They're all drinking and celebrating. And then you've got this extravagant, huge black satin bassinet where the baby's in. And she finds out that she had the son of Satan, and that the devil had sex with her, not Guy. And then she looks at the baby, and apparently the baby's not normal either. And she freaks out more and starts crying and screaming. But I was hoping secretly that we got to see what the baby looked like, but of course they didn't. So that was a little disappointing.
You saw his eyes.
Yeah. And then to make it worse, as we're wrapping up, the husband admitted he made the deal to advance his career. So, you know.
As you do.
Yep, as everyone does, because, you know, now he's going to be a huge star, and that's what he wanted, because they can have another baby. It's okay. She freaks out, spits in his face. And meanwhile, the baby's crying, and she goes over, and the Roman, the guy next door, is like, you know, he really needs a mother. You should take care of him. And then that's pretty much where we end up, where it's kind of like, is she going to take care of the baby? Is she not? I don't know where to start with this one, because there's a lot going on. But I have to say, though, the part, like, because we've talked about before how I really like characters with films. Mm-hmm. I really disliked Guy. He was such a dick. And it's like, the more you learned about him, the more you disliked him. And he was totally sexist and dismissive of all her suspicions and concerns. And meanwhile, he knew the entire time what he'd done. But he's like, no, you're batshit crazy. It's okay. And yeah.
Played by John Cassavetes. And Cassavetes is significantly older than Mia Farrow, right? Which makes it even creepier. Cassavetes is born in 1929, and Mia Farrow is born in 1945. So there's more than a 15-year age gap between the two. And so that makes it a little difficult to swallow their relationship as these young newlyweds, right?
Yes.
The first thing you got to do is you got to get past Roman Polanski as a director, right? So this is one of the ultimate, got to separate the art from the artist. The movie is based on a book written by Ira Levin, and Polanski adapted it for the screen. And so you got Cassavetes, you got Mia Farrow, you got Ruth Gordon plays Minnie, the eccentric next door neighbor. What is really, really interesting about this time period in filmmaking is that in the 1960s and into the 1970s, there is this proliferation of satanic films. Right. So I haven't gone too deep into this, but I
haven't seen most of them. So we'll just put that out there.
Right. So the thing is, it gets me is each decade, horror films reflect what we're afraid of as a society. In the late 50s and the 60s, now Hammer brings all the Gothic horror back. And one of the things that comes along with Gothic horror is Satanism. Even in a Dracula film, the Satanic Rites of Dracula with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, right? So in 1968 with Rosemary Baby, it's another one of these films that comes along that's part of that, right? Because The Exorcist happens 5 years later. The Omen is in 1976. So there's this period, almost a 10-year period, where and they were good movies. It's not like, it's just a lot of schlock. There was a solid, good, maybe 10 films in the genre. Early silent films tell the story of Faust. So what does Faust do? Sells his soul to the devil. What does Guy do? Sells his soul to the devil. It's a recurring theme. And
all it cost him was a baby.
That's all it cost him. And, tormenting.
And sex with his wife, but
right. And letting, Satan have his way with his wife, in a very, very, well done dream sequence. I like it when cities or locations become characters in stories. New York is one of the best places to do that, right? San Francisco, LA, Chicago, right? The iconic cities, where there's recognizable landmarks and history with the buildings. And I think this particular film really plays on that. Polanski would really have you believe that poor Mia Farrow's character, Rosemary, is just paranoid. She's pregnant for the first time. She's
hormonal. She's upset.
100%. Right. So he really plays on that paranoia and creates this atmosphere of claustrophobia.
Yeah. Everything is closing in.
Yep. And the apartment, as you so eloquently described what they did with the apartment, is a character in the film as well. Yeah. Right. And same thing when, as you mentioned at the closing scene, when she walks in and the coven of witches are waiting for her, right? It's this big open room. Where everything else had been claustrophobic. It's like, here she is stepping into a new world that's open to her now, where everything else had been closing in on her. Yeah. And she just happens to be the mother of the son of Satan. But why get wrapped up in the details? But, Mia Farrow really plays it to the hilt, the descent into paranoia and madness. And, they do a great job. The coven does a great job of cutting her off from her friends and from
isolation. That's how the cults do it.
Yep. And it's textbook, but it's really, really well done, because it's all under the guise of, we're helping you. We want the best for you. No. You want to bring Satan's son into the world. You want the best for him, but not for, so it's like, yeah.
What's interesting was, I was looking up, of course, because I like to find some fun facts about the movie. And one of the ones that I thought was interesting was, the scene where she wanders into traffic and she's all like in a daze, she's stressed and not one. Did you know she really did that?
I found that out about 20 minutes before we started.
They told her.
Nobody will hit a pregnant woman.
Yeah. And that's what they were like, in order to capture the scene, and the distracted character, needlessly in this disaster. And it's like, Polanski apparently told her, just, wander out in the street, we'll film it, see what happens.
And it worked.
Yeah.
Right.
And so they said, all the honking horns and all of the reactions that they filmed were actually genuine.
So when you look at, from 68 to say, 76, this does rank up there with The Exorcist and The Omen as far as production value, acting, performances, the script, the whole package, right? The Exorcist is my favorite horror film of all time and always will be.
I have to agree, it's a very good one. It's the second and third, but the first one.
The third one has the best jump scare in the history of film. I thought the performances in the film were great. The neighbors are supposed to be eccentric. They're eccentric. Yeah. Right? The poor woman who throws herself, from the window. If I remember right, didn't she have the amulet? She
did. Yeah. And that's the weird part. So it was like, did you recycle the one she had that was all covered in blood and stuff? Or did you just have spares kicking around? And this is what you do each time you need a baby for the devil.
The thing that you mentioned, are all these things coincidences? And when you get to the end of the film, if you're not sure, it all comes crystal clear. Her friend dying or ending up in the blind in the coma, Guy's success, all of it starts to become crystal clear that this is all part of a plot. There's influence on events
Or the guy going blind.
Yeah.
They did it, you know.
Yep. 100% did it. And the whole thing with the books on witchcraft, he just didn't want his wife finding out the truth or figuring out the truth.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Because they took the other books. She never got those back either. So she got the one from her buddy who ended up dying. And I don't know if I said it though. So when he went in that coma and he basically took him a couple months to die, he left her a book, which she went to the funeral and a person was like, hey, this is his last thing. He said I had to give this to you. And that's how she found out about, you know, Roman and about the witches in more detail, and, you know, confirmed all her suspicions was in the one book. And then that's the one that her husband stole from her and tossed. And then she went to the bookstore and found more, and then those got tossed.
What I find interesting about movies from this time period, all the way into the early 80s, is the depth of the character development. And it does not take you very much to figure out who's who and what's what. It's not forced. The storytelling is very natural, and everybody seems to fit in their environment. Right. I think when you start getting into the slashers of the 80s, and then you get into films beyond that, you get a lot of bad character development or no character development. Yeah. And people start popping off and you don't care. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or you start rooting for the next person to get, you know, that person needs.
That's what we did as kids. We're like, yeah, right? Someone else died. And it's like,
right. Oh. Then you start rooting for the one who needs to go next. Right? You got to go. Just, yeah, you're worthless. But I think, you know, I mean, one of my favorite films of all time is Ghostbusters, right? The 1984 original Ghostbusters. And I always look at that as this example of character development, story building, and how natural it is. And you look at films from the late 60s to the early to mid 80s, and I don't think we're ever going to see a time where almost every film, good film, does that for you.
To me, it worked well in the sense that you had the quirky, like you said, eccentric, you had the characters. It wasn't in your face, but not all the characters I enjoyed, but that's just me. But if we go into like a few of the scenes though, like I did like how you say it was in New York, because you know what? New York has so many amazing buildings, and it just adds to the whole, I think, ambiance of the film. The fact that that's where it took place.
It's a reminder of how big New York is, and you have no idea what's going on in any particular part of it. Anybody's
behind
building,
closed doors.
Exactly, right? Because it could be anything. I wrote a short story that got published at the end of the year. I had that same thing with the suburban experience, right? Everybody's got the high privacy wall and the ivy on their walls, and you never see your neighbors anymore. And it's like, okay, what's going on behind the wall?
You didn't really see any of the other neighbors. It was just all, you know, Minnie and Roman next door. It
adds to that isolation, right? Add to that feeling of isolation. And the thing about that was, it was systematic, right? Everything happened, you know, along like a linear timeline. Well, we're going to separate you from these folks. We're going to make you go to our doctor. We're going to, you know, we're going to.
And you're too sick. She stopped going out in public and, you know, going anywhere. And again, more isolation because she wasn't interacting. She wasn't even going to the store or anything because she was so sick. And it was funny because that extreme excruciating pain she was in for months. It wasn't until I think it was she threatened to, wasn't it go to another doctor? And then all of a sudden it just like a switch, it turned off. You know, she started doing the nursery and she's all happy again. So yeah, obviously we know that was fixed, you know, fixed race.
Yep. We got to make her feel better, but or else she's going to blow this whole plan up. Right. So it's interesting because I always say that the best films and whatnot come from books. You have all these reboots, you have all these different stories. And what you're seeing is you're starting to see more and more folklore coming to the screen as the next evolution of monsters, right? So we've talked about vampires, we've talked about werewolves, and now in this case we have Satan now, and then we had slashers right in the 80s and 90s, and still, you know, we're still making Scream movies, and I'm here for it, right? Because what's next? All right, we've done the human monster, right? We've got serial killers, we've got slashers, fine. But they keep redoing the franchises, they keep doing the reboots, and it doesn't matter what genre, because that's what sells. How many Robin Hood movies do we need? How many King Arthur movies do we need? It's because they make money. They cast with the heartthrob of the week and put him in, some scene where he's not wearing a whole lot of clothes. There's nubile young women running around for the men folk to be looking at. And, these sword and sandal epics, they just make money. There's going to be another Gladiator movie. Now,
do you know, did this movie do really well in the box office when it came out?
You're going to make me look, right? I got the
Maybe.
thing. I got it did win an Oscar, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Who got the Oscar, or did the film get the Oscar?
Ruth Gordon as Minnie, best actress in a supporting role. It was nominated for best writing, screenplay, for Polanski. It was nominated for a BAFTA for best actress, for Mia Farrow.
Do you remember the scene where she was in the phone booth?
Yes.
Where she was kind of like freaking out and trying to call the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember where she was sitting there and she was saying numbers to herself? I don't know if you remember this part.
No.
So, and again, these were like, I guess, apparently Easter eggs that Polanski was like putting all throughout, the movie. But the numbers that she was saying while she was sitting there, she was calling them out to herself, and it was 4, 3, 7, and 7, which seems like normal. But if you take a closer look and then, you kind of flip them over, what do you have? It spells hell.
Yes, it does. You're correct.
So, and that's what I was looking at. Some of the fun facts was there was little things like this that I guess, like I didn't realize in the scene where she was eating, I didn't know what it was until after, but when she at first ate the steak that was really like an 8-second steak, and I was like, oh my God, because I don't even eat steak, period. But then a few scenes later, she was eating, and I thought it looked like liver, but apparently for that scene, she ate real raw liver, and she was actually a vegetarian at the time. I've
had liver exactly once in my life, and I'll never do it again.
But it was raw. It was so gross.
No thanks. This is not Polanski's only foray into Satanism in a film. If you've ever seen Johnny Depp in The Ninth Gate.
I have, actually.
Yes.
I watched that a few months ago. It was on TV. And I was like, I haven't seen this in a while.
Yeah. And it's one of those films you got to watch a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first time I watched it, I had real high hopes for it. And I'm like, But then when you watch it again, and again, things like Easter eggs and little nuances here and there.
Yeah.
And how nuanced Johnny Depp's performance in this film is. He's really reserved, and he actually acts in this movie. He doesn't react. He really owns that Corso character. And did you know that his little helper throughout is actually Polanski's wife?
No, I did not know that.
Yes, Emmanuel is his wife. So
okay. Yeah. And Sharon Tate, though, for the other people that don't know, she's the one that died and was brutally murdered.
Mm-hmm.
So by the Manson family. So just for anybody, fun fact there.
Yeah, fun fact.
Yeah,
yes,
fun fact.
Yes.
Because I didn't realize that they were talking about like certain things that had happened like after the film and just different periods, I guess. And it was 69, I think it was. And that's when she was murdered, and she also had an unborn son. So, and this was all happening, I guess, while Rosemary's Baby was still kind of lingering in the theaters. To go into the weird scenes, so
yeah, we've kind of glossed this over.
We glossed that over,
and
but
it's
that's
like
okay.
The key,
we can go back.
Well, it's the key moment in the film where, and again, it's done in a way that you don't know if it's real. You mentioned that she's high as a kite after the peyote brownie, or whatever you want to call it,
pudding brownie, whatever cup of fun that she had.
The cup of fun.
She only ate half of it.
Mm-hmm.
think of, well, I guess that's probably why they wanted her totally out, is, if she ate the whole thing. But
yeah, she was gonna have a visitor.
And it was like this weird ass acid trip basically that she had. And it was like, the part that I really liked just was for the few seconds where it showed where she was like in the sunshine floating on water, and the water was just so blue. And I looked up a few things for this because, like I even watched the scene twice because I'm like, there was so much going on. It was just a bad, weird trip that she was having. And then it's like there was a yacht, and the dude who operated the elevator from the building was there in a sailor suit, dressed all up. There was a room full of naked people watching her at one point, which now we know they probably were there watching her.
I think so. I think it was all the folks from the end scene.
Yes,
were hanging around, right?
They painted her naked body with, was it red paint or supposed to be blood? I'm not sure.
My money says blood. But, from
it
what
looked
I
really
don't know.
yeah. And then you don't really realize till the end, because it's like she's getting raped by the devil with an audience, but then did this really happen? And then and I didn't realize how they even went to like the Sistine Chapel, and they started showing all the scenes with the biblical events in Catholic history. So I was just like, this whole scene just covered so much that was going on.
Yeah, and it told you basically the story of the movie in one scene.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so well done that you just hit the nail on the head. You don't know if it's real. And the whole thing adds to Rosemary's paranoia and all the things that she's going through. You just wonder if she's just this hysterical, paranoid mom to be who's never gone through a pregnancy before. Mm-hmm. Right. So you have no earthly idea if these things really are happening, and that's the beauty of the film, I think, is that for a long stretches in the film, you think, maybe these are just paranoid delusions. She has become, in everybody else's mind, she's the vessel.
Yeah.
So what she thinks, how she feels, what she wants, nobody cares except for the health of Satan's child.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Nothing else matters. Everything else is immaterial until she finally has that fit where she's like, I'm going to go tell somebody. Yeah. We're not doing this.
And they're
anymore.
like, crap.
Yeah. Okay. Now we got to make her feel better. So they make her feel better. And every time Minnie's around, she won't accept no for an answer. This is the taking control of Rosemary's life. Mm-hmm. And not just her life, but her body, her time. And that really indicates that she's no longer,
except her haircut. That was her. And then everyone told her how bad she looked. And I remember her husband was like, that's the worst mistake you've ever made in your life. And I was like, damn.
I think marrying you, guy, might have been a bigger mistake, but hey,
everyone was just like, what did you do? You cut off your hair. And
right. We always have these slice of life moments, but these movies are a slice of time. And that's another reason I like them, is because it's a time capsule. You can go back and see especially when they're filmed in a place like New York, you can go back and see what it was like at that time.
And you see all the cars and you see how people are dressed, and, you get the whole ambiance of what it was like.
Yep. And Rosemary is all, 60s mod dresses and all of that stuff. And, which is a real interesting contrast to, as you mentioned, the wardrobe of the goofy next door neighbors.
Right? Yes, she was all chic and very stylish all the time, and then they're like weird, frumpy, like, I don't know.
Nothing in these movies is an accident.
Yeah.
Right. There's the clothes, the atmosphere, the scenes. None of it's an accident. It's all there for a reason. And you juxtapose Rosemary with Roman and Minnie, and it just shows you how out of place she is and how out of time she is. She's in her time, but she's out of time in her own space, if that makes sense.
Like, I definitely enjoyed this a lot better than the werewolf movie. So just because, as we know, I don't like werewolves. But this one was different in the sense, like, I still wouldn't rate it as like super high, like I don't know. I'd say I'd give this about a 4. Yes, there's certain aspects where it's like, oh, I know where this is going. Oh, I know where this is going. Like, the little hints that you pick up if you're looking for them, right?
Sure.
And I guess I think I like to have the more unpredictable things where it's like, oh, and just out of nowhere this happens. I'm like, shit, I didn't see that coming. But as it goes for being in the 60s and for, I think, the setting and the way it developed, I think it was good. Like, I wasn't sitting there like, is this done yet?
When she realizes that her baby's alive and all that. And, it is an aha moment, but it's very subtle and very nuanced. And that's another thing I like about it, because it confirms everything that we thought up to that point.
Yeah. Right? Because
where we were
like, maybe.
Right. Because we're almost like detectives in this thing, right? We're putting the clues together as the thing goes along. And we're like, are they Satanists? Are they a cult? If you know nothing about it going in, like you, right? Yeah. Or is she just nuts? It's a very atmospheric film. It leads you in a couple different directions. And even when you think you got it figured out, it's still a moment at the end. One of those iconic moments in horror cinema that everybody knows and everybody remembers. You might not know everything that leads up to it, but you remember this. from Mia Farrow, right?
And at the very end, the cheesy music for the opening credits in the end, and I was kind of like, in the bright pink font, I was like, what is this? But I guess because it's like a baby, so it's like baby's pink. I don't know, but it wasn't a girl baby. So, well, if you had to rate this, if I'm going to give it a 4, what would you?
I'm going to give it a 4 too.
Yeah.
It's on my top 100 list that I do on my blog, that of my favorite horror films,
which we will put a link below.
I appreciate that. It's I'd give it a solid 4. There's so much of it that you can identify with.
So anyway, that's it today for A Virgin's View. Thank you everyone for tuning in from home. Thank you, Jerry, for being my co-host today. This was a lot of fun. And otherwise, stay safe and stay morbid. Bye for now.